Chapter 15. So, what do you think about the relationship between Joyce and Daniel? Augustine asked. It sounded like gossip, but it was far more than that. He needed to know if there was something there for the sake of the investigation. Well, she was pretty quick to drop him in it with the CCTV, wasn't she? Electra responded, with a question of her own. She felt there was a significance until that point. But she called him Dan. And what did he say? My friends can call me that. Sounds like she's a friend, maybe more. The way he goes about his business, I doubt he's got many of those. And the look in her eyes when he was mentioned, it felt like a lot more. I'm with you on that, but we don't convict people on feelings now, do we, Gus? We convict them on hard evidence. I've lost count of the number of times you've told me that. So what hard evidence do we have at this point in time? Not a great deal. We've gathered DNA evidence from the scene, but it doesn't match anything we have on record. So the person is clean in the past, first-time criminal. And that means we've got a lot of work to do in order to find a lead, chase it down, and then match it with the DNA. Any ideas? Well, I think that the beer bottle at the scene is significant. We've got someone who says it isn't just unusual, it's never happened before. And that means if we find the owner of that bottle of beer, we find the killer. I agree, Electra. So when we get back to the station, we have a couple of things to do. And I'd say the first of those is to release Johnny Lawton. The CCTV was our route to keeping him in longer. As it stands, we don't have anything to keep him in for. I'll let Cal Green know. You let Johnny know. Sound like a deal? You've definitely got the rough end of that bargain, Gus. The pair laughed. Electra looked at Augustine and wondered what life might be like if they were together. Here she was, bouncing away from another man, another failed relationship. And there was Augustine, dependable, steady, and a good man. She had a penchant for the bad boys, and then questioned why they continued to be bad. Gus was settled down with Christine, and they had a beautiful girl who was somewhere between the ages of 1 and 2. Electra was never any good at remembering ages or birthdays, but she was sure Nightingale was between those ages. In fact, she'd put money on it. But she knew why they weren't together. It was because they weren't compatible. It was because she always wanted something different. It was because they had never had the conversation with each other about being anything other than colleagues, and it would stay that way. As they reached the police station, both prepared internally for the conversation they were about to have. Electra's would be full of cheer. The man was being released, and he would be desperately happy. She would tell him that he was under strict instructions to go nowhere, especially not on his proposed trip to Scotland, where he could quite easily disappear. Augustine's conversation would be full of gloating. Cal Green celebrated loudly and excessively every small win over the police. It was one of the main reasons why he was employed by the criminal underworld. He was definitely one of them. He loved nothing better than rubbing Augustine's nose in it. After the conversations, the pair were due to meet back up again and talk through their next steps. It had been a long day already with the early start. Electra was even more tired because of the night she'd spent on the sofa. Even though they wanted to get some rest, both knew that they wouldn't be able to do that without a plan of action. Gus? The voice went as he ventured back towards their office. It was Lou. Lou, how's things? Just wondered if you fancied that drink this evening. He was closing in on his wedding anniversary. His wife had died over a decade ago. He didn't want to be alone. Augustine searched the back of his mind and guessed that it was nearly that time of the year again. Of course. Does 8 o'clock sound okay? Weatherspoons in Concord? Yes, mate, Lou replied eagerly. As the two men finished their conversation, they were forced to one side by a police officer taking someone from a cell to the front desk. Good afternoon. Excuse me, PC Sarah Land said, looking at the two detectives as she walked. She recognized them from before, particularly the younger one. He had been in the newspapers an awful lot over the previous few years. Awful injury. Everyone was glad that he was back on the force, solving crimes, being a valued member of the team again. As she passed, the older man looked in her direction and smiled. The younger man looked lost in his thoughts. Either that, or he was trying to crank the damaged brain into gear. At the last second, before the female police officer went out of view and thought he was rude, Augustine looked up and replied, "Good afternoon. Hang on a second. Who's that?" "This is a drunk driver. He is sobered up and will be either walking home, getting on a bus, or calling for a taxi. I don't care which one, but he won't be driving, that's for sure," PC Land explained. "He won't be going anywhere for a while, will you, Daniel?" Augustine replied. Daniel Godfrey looked up and mouthed an obscenity under his breath before following it up with 2 words. "No, copper." "Lou, can you get Electra for me? Tell her we're in interview room number 4. She'll be pleasantly surprised who she meets in there, but tell her no more than that." Lou left in the opposite direction, already knowing where Electra would be. The news that Johnny Lawton was released had already reverberated around the station. Lou put 2 and 2 together and guessed that she would be the one letting him know. Augustine pointed to the interview room with the number 4 stenciled on it. "Right, Daniel. Shall we?"